This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state or the South, depending on how I'm feeling that day. Today is the 20th, this weekend is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And I have with me two authors who have written about this event and its catastrophic nature and its impact on the land and the people and our history going forward and going backwards. I have with me Julie Liddell Whitehead, and she will introduce herself and her book in a minute. And I have Mr. Rod Davis. Julie is my writing partner, so I think I have to be, I have to give a little one, I'm very proud of her and give a little shout out, but two, just that we have a pre-existing relationship. I've met Rod through Julie, and Rod, you're from Texas, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Great, everything's bigger and better in Texas.
Uh,
So I'll let y'all introduce yourself. Um, Rod, why don't you go first?
well, I'm living up in Wichita Falls now, but I've mostly lived in uh, San Antonio recently, Austin, Dallas, a bunch of different places. I also lived in Montgomery, Alabama, and Birmingham, and went to school at LSU. So I've spent some time in Louisiana in the past. Uh, but the way I got into this particular story is when I lived in San Antonio from about 2000 to 2006, I worked for the paper there, the Express News, and it's a Hearst paper.
Mhm.
And I was the travel editor of all things, and I happened to be out somewhere the morning of the 29th and heard about the hurricane hitting, and I immediately wanted to leave and get back and go to New Orleans. I had to talk to my bosses a fair amount to do that. And I talked him into it eventually, but I didn't get to leave till late that afternoon towards New Orleans. And uh,
So were you going down there for humanitarian purposes or for journalistic purposes?
journalistic purposes, I
Okay.
was going to report on it. Most of the books I've written have involved New Orleans in some way or the other, and I knew it pretty well. But it turned out they let me go too late. There's no way I was going to make it that same day. I ended up staying in the far side of Houston uh, because everything was booked up. People had been fleeing New Orleans a lot, and so there were no places to stay. I kept getting information, and I picked it was a Holiday Inn, I think, in a little refinery town on the other side of Houston. Stayed there, but that was a good thing because I met a family from Cutoff, Louisiana, which is just south, I guess, of New Orleans, southwest.
Hmm.
And it was along the Bayou Fouche and an old town. And I met a guy there who had been a boat captain and his family, and they had left home to be safe. And because of that, I was able to go back and spend some time with them later and write about that. And they also wound up in a way in my book. So uh, my whole time in New Orleans, right after the hurricane, I went down there altogether. I think I was down there about 5 weeks. Went for a while, then came back, and then went back right after. Oh hell, what was the one that hit right in October? Uh,
Rita.
Rita.
yeah, right after Rita, and to see how it was doing, how the city was doing. Well, it still wasn't doing very well at all, and but not as bad as that first week, especially. And I was so touched by everything I saw and heard. I wanted to write a book immediately. You wouldn't believe how many people were writing books about it immediately already. So I couldn't get anywhere with that. And what I did over time was I thought, well, I'll take another look at it. What about some people that were there? How did they deal with it as human beings and people that live there and deal with the situation? And that turned into the book, uh, that I've written, and Life in the Time of Hurricanes. And so my book is a novel. However, it includes quite a bit of the stuff that happened. I was the first reporter to go into the convention center after it opened up, and a photographer from the Express News, Lisa Krantz, she was the first photographer to get in there. We didn't know we were in there at the same time until the next day. Uh, but I was able to see a lot of things like that. And I remembered all those things, and I decided to put those into a story of itself because I know a lot of people that got out of New Orleans, that stayed in New Orleans. I saw just about every bad sight there could be right after the hurricane hit, and I was very familiar with just the town in general, and some of it was just so awful, and so I turned that in. I'm going off key, I guess, but I turned that into a novel that just started in my head. Uh, it was about a guy who lives there. He was in his 40s. His name is Dwayne McGuane, and it starts with him standing on the levee in downtown New Orleans, right behind the well, it was right behind Jackson Square, I guess, along that
Cafe
little
Du
area.
Monde,
It's
that,
full of
yeah,
tourists.
yeah.
And he goes through what he wants to do with his life, but meanwhile, he's noticing the weather is changing. And his what he wants to do is ultimately make a movie uh, about the South. And what happens is he gets, kicked out of the city and ends up going to for somebody leased him some land way out in West Texas on the Big Bend. He thinks he can go out there and still make a movie about the South, which of course is insane. And but he has a lot of people he met, and he ran a little arts theater uh, in uptown New Orleans, which I fashioned on a place that actually had been there, but it's a completely different name. And he got a group of people. They went out there in a stolen church van that they saw that had been stranded, and the story is how the people that went him. There were 11 people, or 10 people plus him, and there were I think it was 6 of them were black folks. One of them was a gay guy. A couple of them, 3 of them were women, uh, and they all kind of knew each other vaguely. Uh, Essentially, all 11 of them had to leave town because they had nowhere to stay right after, and they tried the convention center. They had to get out of there, uh, and decided and this guy Dwayne said, "Well, I've got a place out in Texas we can go to and get our bearings, and maybe we can make that movie out there." So they all went, and so I had them follow a route that a lot of people were taking out of New Orleans at that time. And they went I-10 west towards Texas. A lot of people went into Texas and stayed in San Antonio and Houston in particular. And but they kept going past that. But they went through the western part of Louisiana, through Cajun country, through places that were terribly racist, and just a horde of problems. The gas stations on that route, you could hardly go to the bathroom in any of them. They smelled so bad. If you could even buy gas there, and because the credit cards didn't work in a lot of them at that point, you had to have cash. So it was all that stuff. Tried to work those details in the exodus of it, or Odyssey, I guess more like. And
No, it was an
they go out
exodus.
there, and by the end of the book, only 2 people came back to stay in New Orleans of the 11. And some came back and then went on because they couldn't stay in their houses anymore. There was no possible way. And there might have been the Ninth Ward or the Seventh Ward, or and several people didn't make it. And that's the story I wanted to tell from a story standpoint, I guess, because I'm more like a story writer than a reporter when I get down to it. And and it took me quite a few years to do it, off and on, because I had regular jobs and I just had to do what I could do. And We finally got it out this past year. I wanted it to come out now in September, which it will, but they didn't. TCU Press, which is a real good press here, especially for fiction in Texas. It's hard to get fiction anymore, I'm telling you. And uh, but we didn't get it where it would come out 4 to 5 months ahead of time, like these freaking
Mm-hmm.
the big five uh, publishing companies want to do for their own uh, commercial interests. So if you have a book that comes out and you're only 3 weeks away from it coming out, you can hardly get anybody to review it anymore. Um, so, but what we're going to do, I knew it had to come out now, so I pushed for that, and they were okay with that. So that's where I am now. It didn't come out early enough, but it's out, and I think it's a good story. I don't tell the story from what happened, in a nonfiction way, but I do incorporate an awful lot of that into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people would, I hope they would catch on to the characters that are involved and how they're facing it in different ways, because I think that reflects a lot of things that happened in New Orleans, and and then how they end up. But I I I thought that was another way of looking at it than a historical or nonfiction recount, which is all great today. Uh, you've probably heard on radio stations, TV stations, all these people looking back at the day
Mm-hmm.
that it hit, and so that's how I'm here, I guess. And I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate being on the show to talk about it. I could talk forever, so I should probably shut up for right now and pass it on.
Well, let's get Julie's, and then we'll come
Yeah,
back and
I'm
we'll
sorry,
we'll
Julie.
all talk.
Okay. All
Let's
right. Well, let's see. I feel like I've talked enough about myself on this particular podcast, but
well
I came to
tell us your like how you were connected to Katrina, and then basically like an overview of the book.
right. Um, I was in Brandon, Mississippi when Katrina came through, and it was still a Category 1 storm when it hit us, 150 miles inland, which is ridiculous. And as far as I know, that's never happened before or since. But we did not have direct damage from it. We did lose power for a week and had some situations come from that. I had 3 young children under the age of 10, trying to manage them, and them being out of school. Their school had been damaged, so we were trying to work around all of these effects of the storm without actually having been affected by the storm in any significant way. But the storm left a mark on me in that I thought, watching everything that happened down on the coast and up higher, and how people had tried to get ready for this and just couldn't. That I know they staged a lot of hurricane supplies in Hattiesburg and Meridian, and they were destroyed because Hattiesburg and Meridian were hit so hard. So it was just what it came down to for me, dealing with the effects of the storm, was how could the good God let this happen to good people? And telling the story of what do you do when you don't know what to do when something like this happens to you and you're not prepared,
Mm-hmm.
mentally or physically or emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of this became about the psychological impacts of the storm, about what people who maybe didn't lose everything lost, regardless of their physical losses, what they lost mentally. And so that's a lot of what came out of the storm for me. This particular story, it has 4 storylines in it. Each one has 5 short stories devoted to it, and they're interlocked. You have story 1, story 2, story 3, story 4, and then you start again with story 1, story 2, story 3, story 4 through 20 separate short stories. And so the first story deals with a married couple, Wendy and Ray Magnum, and he is a hardware store owner and a professional firefighter. He's bivocational, and his wife works at a daycare center with 3-year-olds because they can't have children, it seems like. And she winds up being isolated at their home while Ray is on duty at the firehouse because of the hurricane in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, with a friend of Ray's named Judd McKay, who comes along, and in the middle of the height of the storm, they have an encounter and she winds up pregnant. And the rest of that storyline is playing out. How does she deal with that, with the guilt from that situation, and what happens as a result of that situation? The second story is Tommy Abear and his girlfriend, Cindy De La Fosse. Tommy Abear is a car mechanic and he lives in Metairie, Louisiana. And he came out to help his neighbors. He had an airboat and he went through the flooded areas of town, evacuating people and taking them to higher ground, and trying to get them to shelters and that sort of thing. And he does that all the day of the hurricane after it comes through, and then the next day he gets a call to go out to a place called the Thompson Place. It's in Mandeville, and he goes, and there's a house that has collapsed on a young family, a young woman and her baby, and they get the debris broken down and off, but there's nothing they can do for the young woman. They can't get her out because a beam has landed on her legs and crushed them, and they can't get it to move and get her to medical safety. So he has to deal with guilt over that, and he starts drinking. Then the third storyline is Mike Seabrook and his wife Dinah. Mike is a ER nurse in Slidell, Louisiana, and he is trying to, after the hurricane, help people that can make it into the hospital as best they can. And he loses someone in the emergency room in the waiting room from heat exhaustion, and he cannot deal with that having happened on his shift, even in the situation they're in. And he has a crisis of faith, and that plays out over the next several stories. And the final storyline is James and Lori King. Lori King is pregnant, is early in her pregnancy, and the barometric pressure causes her to miscarry. And while she's dealing with that up in North Mississippi, where they had evacuated to in Noxapater, Mississippi, her husband went back down to their home in Kenner, Louisiana, which was intact but had been looted. And her husband finds out that his best friend and neighbor was shot trying to protect their house from the looters. So those are the stories we're talking about here, all of them affected by the hurricane, and what they go through after being affected by these terrible situations. So that's kind of the roundup of the book.
Wow. Okay, so that, bunch of things. First of all, Julie, you read a lot of Faulkner? Because this is
No.
like something right out of Faulkner. Is anyways, or Eudora Welty. So Rod, I have a couple of questions because you went into the city after the storm.
Yeah.
What was the global? I don't know how you would take in that kind of impact. I mean, I've seen devastation when someone has blown up a bomb. I've seen carnage without lack. I've seen but this is catastrophic. I mean, this is so much more, and I can't imagine. What was your overall senses like? I mean, what was the sensory overload like? And how long after the storm had passed through were you there?
Well, I got there, like I said, I got held up on the 29th trying to get there. So the first day I got there was the next day, the 30th. And well, it just is shock. I mean, just shocked me. I hadn't seen the city like that. But when I got in, it was very hard to get in at that point. And you had to come in over that one big bridge pretty close to downtown. I can't remember what CC something. But you had to be cleared by state patrol or whoever the hell was out there saying you could go through or not. I got in there and I couldn't stay overnight because I couldn't find any place to stay. But why, when I first went in that day, it was just hard to believe. Everything was wet or underwater. There were buildings that were just, caved in from whatever pressure. And there were just people. The other thing was there's so many people walking around, not knowing what to do, trying to get over the bridge. Now, at that point, the kind folks from Algiers were blocking people from coming across that bridge from New Orleans over into Algiers on the West Bank, especially if they were black people. They just turned them back, and some people got disappeared or beat up. It was a horrible thing. I didn't know that at the time, but I could just see all these people lining up, and you get down into the city, and again, it was just so many people just walking around not knowing what to do. Ironically, the downtown French Quarter and all that in New Orleans was the least harmed by the flooding because it's a bowl. And they're on the edges of the bowl. The people that got hurt the most as you go into the center of the town. That's where the biggest flooding happened. And I had to, like I said, I had to leave that evening because I had nowhere to stay at that point, and I had to end up driving all the way back to St. Martinville on Highway 90 before I could get a place to stay. Uh, and then I went back and forth every day for about a week. I was there for about 2.5 weeks, first off, and then about 2 weeks the second time around. And I eventually just found places to stay. At one point, the newspaper in Huma, uh, which is owned by the New York Times of all things, they let some of us sleep in their offices, and that was strange. But and then we drive back in. Finally, I found a place where I could stay in closer into town all the time. But I did a lot of going back and forth. It got easier and easier to stay into town. Found a hotel finally to stay in. At one point, there was on St. Charles, which is an uptown part of the city, I guess. It's a famous boulevard that has the tram that goes up and down there, the trolley car, and Hearst had gotten some guy that lived there in those most big old houses along St. Charles had allowed Hearst to let their reporters stay in there, and that we were protected by some uh, some kind of protection group of people that came in, and so people from the Houston Chronicle and from the San Antonio paper, which are sisters, we got to stay there, but we had to sleep in chairs and on the floor and you name it. But we could stay in town. So I spent a lot of time driving where I could drive to places and talking to people, writing stories about people down in the Irish, uh, what do you call it? The Irish something. um,
Parish.
that anyway, that part of the city, it'll come to me in a minute. That a guy who had a grocery store and had to keep it had been looted completely, so he had people in there so that no one would come in and steal bread or just normal things that you needed. And he took me up to his apartment along that area, and he was collecting water on the roof because he didn't have any water anymore. Uh, there were all those stories everywhere, and then I'd go over to other parts of town where there were no houses; they were knocked off their slabs, and people were. I remember one near, I guess it was London. People would just be in their houses looking at things that had been on the shelves, and there were either water in there or flood marks, 3 or 4 feet high where the flood had been, and they were just looking at their stuff like glazed. Nobody, they were beyond being scared. They were just had nothing to think about. And then, of course, near there were the houses where people had been up on the roofs, got up there to escape the flooding. Some drowned because they couldn't get out of their attic. And you would see signs of that all over the place. I just saw a whole lot of water, a whole lot of destruction. And a lot of people were, stronger than you might think they would be facing all this and trying to help each other. I saw a lot of that. I saw way too many of these people they brought in, like the freaking DEA and various kinds of national cops and so on that were going around, to take care of everybody. And I got mad at one of them one time on St. Charles. There was an old man with a bicycle that wanted to get on a bus so they could take him back closer to where he lived. And there was kind of bus you could put a bicycle on the front. But this I guess it was the DEA guy wouldn't let him get on the bus for some reason. And we had words about it, but I couldn't win against the guy with a gun. But
Hmm.
and that poor old man had to stand there. There was stuff like that too. Uh, so all that, I mean, I was just thinking, reading, the reading what Julie said, how she focused on the individuals and how they responded and how they were hurt and how they tried. I'm really glad to see her kind of book, and I guess my kind of book, were sort of in the same area. We were looking at people, how they dealt with things. And in Mississippi too, I was really glad to see that, because I think they always say, history tells a story and fiction tells you how it felt. And I still believe that. And so that's what I was attempting to do in my book. It's kind of, as one person has already written a review of my book, said they were kind of offbeat people, which is what New Orleans is.
Yeah.
Mhm,
I mean,
exactly.
who else would you have? And so I'm sorry, I overtalked again.
No, we were both laughing because this exactly describes New Orleans. New Orleans is full of offbeat people.
Yeah.
So here on this anniversary, and we have these two very different books addressing um, the human condition, is what I am hearing, is that your books deal with how humans reacted to a catastrophic event, a real catastrophic event that you can go
Yeah.
and
Yes,
read about.
yes.
Mhm.
Um, this is a strange question because Rod, yours hasn't even launched yet.
No.
If you were
Mm.
to rewrite any portion of your book, both of you, think about this, what would you change? Would you change anything?
No. I did editing up to the end. I made a mistake on one that I just got some names wrong and I fixed that. If you write a book involving New Orleans ever, about anything, and you get a street name wrong or anything wrong, you'll hear from somebody there because they're very touchy about any
They're
mistake at
very
all.
proud of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you better not misidentify something, but I still feel the way I saw. And my book, the print model doesn't come out until the 15th, although it's on order. You can
Yeah,
see
yeah.
it on Amazon and those places already. But I'm having to use social media. And today, uh, Press is supposedly putting out something where I read a passage or two from my book.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And I don't know, Julie, if you want to do that, do we want to read a passage from our books or not?
No, that'll be fine with me.
Um,
Let me stand up and grab mine.
I've got one. Well,
Good question. I wouldn't change anything about mine because I think it touches. It's so indicative of what happened to me mentally that I think if I had been, what would change it would be if I had been boots on the ground like Rod was, and I was where I was. I mean, I saw the devastation where I was, but we still had houses standing, and we still had um basic
Stores to
civilization.
go to and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And we were not wiped out like that. Now, if I had been boots on the ground on the coast, it probably would have been different. but I wasn't. And so that was not what I dealt with after Katrina. And so that's why I didn't write the book like that.
Okay, so when in your production of your book, while Julie looks for her passage she wants to read, when you guys were writing your book, did you feel like it was your catharsis for what you witnessed?
I didn't at the time. I just wanted to write I just had to write this book, and it just kept coming to me. Uh, and I was, so the main character in there, he's a, like I say, has a movie theater. He's a big fan of people like Fellini and those kinds of, and I guess I leaned a little towards that myself in presenting a bunch of people whose stories intertwined in different ways, uh, and were maybe a little different than the ordinary way you'd be looking at it. But now, especially now this past week, with thinking much more about, the actual, I guess anniversary is not the greatest word, but of Katrina, I do think about it a lot more deeply. I think it really has lodged in my head. And I was talking to a friend this morning about it, and I just went off on a whole thing of all the stuff I saw down there at the time. And I just remembered it right down to the detail. So you probably do the same, Julie. There's some things you just can't get out of your head. But
Right.
I, I wanted to write this. I hope it, sells books, but I also think it's a story that has a meaning if it can, ground anywhere or just stay alive. But uh, it was important to me to do that. Probably I've written 6 fiction books now and one nonfiction book, and I like all of them, but I think this one is more personal to me than any of the ones I've had so far.
Wow.
Can I read
Julie,
you a passage?
yeah, are you ready? I was going to see if Julie was
This is the
ready.
one, I only have this because I already typed these out for something else, but this is fairly short. And it comes about the second or third chapter into the book as Katrina approaches, and this is Dwayne is thinking about how it's affecting his entire plans and everything in his life. Says, the winds and water and sheets of unstoppable powers gathered on the eastern horizon of the Gulf, positioned to deal as they pleased with the so-called immovable forces of land, and where wild panthers and thick forests, and then explorers and exploiters from around the world had gathered and built and bragged, but now waited for payback. These same forces also had been, driving the fuse and howl inside Dwayne McGuane and becoming his visions and his own second sight, and he knew it would be unshirted hell.
Ooh,
So,
I like that. I like that last sentence.
and that's what it was.
Yeah. Mine, as far as catharsis, I think two things have helped me. One, I had forgotten this and remembered it yesterday that I used to have to make elaborate plans around the Hurricane Katrina anniversary so I wouldn't remember and I wouldn't encounter anything that reminded me of it
Wow.
because it would send me into a tailspin. It really would. And that stopped, I guess, 2021. I started working on this book
I was going to say that
again.
was when you started writing the book.
Yeah, I started working on the book again in January 2022.
Mm-hmm.
But up until that point, I really did. I had to do all kinds of gymnastics to keep from thinking about Hurricane Katrina because it would send me into a tailspin. But the killing thing about writing this was it transmuted it into something so different. It made it was a way for me to share what had happened to me without sharing personal details, I guess. Share it through other people, displace it off of my head and my life and my situation onto someone that wasn't real. And that lessened the sting of it a little bit. I think is what wound up happening to me. I don't think from here on out I'm going to have to worry about the Katrina anniversary again, because now those memories and all that pain has been put into this book.
So it has been
And it's something
cathartic.
for me, yeah, it's something for me to remind myself about it, but something for me to be proud of, that I turned it from something so awful into something that may can help someone else.
Yeah, because you actually lived through it yourself, whereas I just visited it, I guess.
Right. We were up here in the middle of it. I lost power, the whole drill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, it was a category 1 where we were, but
And
it was,
that's way far inland.
yeah, it is. It's so far inland, it's not even funny. We're on I-20. You know where that is, right? All right, let me read a little bit here about James. And mine's going to be a little bit longer than Rod's was. This is the story, What's Mine is Mine. That sunny morning, James King was whistling along with his radio as he drove through the streets of Kenner, Louisiana. Most structures in the town suffered wind damage: businesses, houses, power lines. He was off work almost a week now because of the storm. He'd spent the days in Noxapater, Mississippi with his wife's family. Now he was headed down to his place to see what needed to be done now that his neighborhood, next to a police station, received power back after the repairs to the lines. He'd wanted to see it first before bringing his wife, Lori, down. He'd already sent her some pictures of landmarks around town over text so she could get a feel for what was going on. He'd almost cried when he saw Mary Mahoney's restaurant in the newspaper the day after the storm, off its foundation and sitting forlornly on the beach. The owners vowed to rebuild, but of course it wasn't ever going to be the same. Nothing was ever going to be the same, James was convinced, except he still loved Kenner as home and wanted to be a part of rebuilding it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Rod, you were talking about people leaving and the exodus. My cousin went all the way to New Mexico,
Oh, wow.
and then um, I think she married someone there. I don't think they were from New Orleans. It was a second marriage and ended up being incredibly disastrous. And so here she was already vulnerable with her children, her two daughters. She enters into this relationship in New Mexico where she's a transplant and she's lost her anchor back in New Orleans. She's lost her community, her friendship. She was in the lower ninth ward. All of that's wiped out. Her job is gone. She was a school teacher. Everything about her life was turned upside down. And to survive, she fled with her two girls. Ends up in New Mexico. And I don't know if she bought a travel trailer there or somehow she ends up in temporary quarters there while she's looking for something more permanent. And she ends up in this the Katrina relationship. And so one thing I keep hearing is so many people they were traumatized. They were living in trauma and they lost their partners or they didn't have a partner or they were in between partner, whatever. Marriages ended because of people don't know what to do in that kind of a stress level.
Mhm.
They've lost their anchors, their location of what we in the South call place, everything that they were connected to in some way, even down to the banana plant that was outside their cottage or their home, gone. So there's no iconic thing that they can connect to anymore. They're gone. It's all gone. It was just obliterated. And so they ended up in this diaspora. They were sent away. One thing we've noticed here, and I'm in Columbus, which is northeast Mississippi, so I'm north of Meridian, I'm south of Tupelo. One thing that when they brought a lot of the hurricane refugees, and that's what they called them, they brought them here and they housed them at the local women's college, and they I don't know if they opened up one or two dorms, but they gave these people refuge, and they destroyed the refuge.
Mhm.
And the anger and the destruction, and that, so was it the chicken or the egg? What was y'all's um and that's carried over because those that stayed and didn't continue on to somewhere else, because most of them could not return back to New Orleans, they had nothing to return to. um they're still displaced souls who live here. They have no connection to this place other than they resent the fact that they were brought. I don't know if it's subliminal or is out in the open, but they resent that they are here in this place. And I'm sure other towns have experienced this too. I've read um, psychological reports, sociological observations, police reports, all kinds of studies that have gone on. So it's almost as if they all came, but there was no support system. They weren't from wars. So it was a natural disaster of such great proportion, and there was no plan in place anywhere of how to deal with the generational trauma this has caused. And it's really caused some problems in small southern towns across Mississippi and Louisiana and lower Alabama. What have y'all read or seen, or what is your take on this?
Well, I think your sister could have been in the stolen church van that my group took out. I mean, honestly, because they went all the way out to Presidio
Uh-huh.
in
This is my
Big
cousin. She
Bend.
took a, I think she drove her Suburban out there.
And so she just kept going a little bit farther. But it was this, I think she might, I'm not trying to sell my book, but she might be interested in reading the
Oh,
book
I'm sure she will.
where they make that long trip and they get out there and at that time there weren't that many people in the Big Bend because it was just the opposite. And here's this guy wanted to make a movie about the South in the
Hmm.
mountains of the Big Bend, and because he wanted to get everybody out and
Yeah.
everybody was ready to go somewhere. But what happened along the way was uh, there were two one of the person's uh, wife and another one his sister. They each had two kids, and as they went farther along, both of the mothers and their two kids wanted to go back to be with their families. And but their families weren't in New Orleans; they were in someplace else, say in Louisiana or Georgia, and they didn't want to press on to a new life that could sustain them, and they couldn't see that happening. And then the brother and the husband of they went back to see them eventually themselves, but they wanted to press on. And but I think the issue was one of the two of the families, they were both black, and Dwayne and the rest of them were all white. It was about 6 to 5 or something like that. But one of the mothers said to Dwayne, said, you know, I can see you moving out and living in West Texas, but I can't see me
Hmm.
moving out there. And that's definitely racial discussion, a reference, I mean.
Hmm.
And it was completely clear because how are they going to go and adjust from New Orleans, the Seventh Ward, to some little town along the border between Texas and Mexico? That's not going to happen.
Well, the other thing that seems to be is that a lot of the people who left didn't have any marketable skills that were wanted in these new towns because they lived in the inner city, they worked in restaurants and tourism industry, and then here you go to little podunk towns. Let's say you go to Ackerman, Mississippi. Well, you might have a place that's given to you to stay in, but they don't really want you there. And they think you're transient and you're going to go back to New Orleans or wherever. You're going to keep moving through, and so they don't encourage you to become part of the population subconsciously, whether it's on purpose or not. But the reaction is anytime you moved into a closed society, a closed community, and you're new and you're different, and it doesn't matter if you're white, pink, or purple, if you're coming from New Orleans, you're different. And so you go to West Texas and they're going, they might as well have come from Mars.
Yeah.
And it would be the same thing if somebody from New Orleans moved up to Ackerman or Columbus, Mississippi, or Clayton Village. It would be a closed community and wouldn't. It would be like somebody speaking who came here who spoke Greek and moved here and nobody speaks Greek.
Yeah.
You look alike. You all eat tomatoes and rice, but
Yeah. What I saw with people I knew, um, I'm not sure you know this, Shannon, because I just now started talking about it recently. Bob's company distributed generators throughout the Southeast. So we got to see up close and personal guys that in the middle of all this, when it first happened, were driving down into these destroyed areas with generators.
Wow.
And one of them, they were stopped somewhere between Hattiesburg and the coast by the National Guard. National Guard's like, "Where'd you get these?" He said, "From my boss. We sell them. They're already paid for by dealers and customers down in here, and we're trying to get them down here to help people." And he's like, "Well, who's your boss? So I can call and make sure you didn't steal them from somebody." Okay, so they go through all that rigmarole. And then they go down there and they see all this. One of those guys developed a serious drinking problem after Katrina, and it took years for him to get out of it. I mean, he already beforehand, but it took years for him to get out of it. Um, just people, my the person the book is dedicated to, Lori, was my friend. She worked in mental health, and she said she got a call from the coast on one of their sister organizations saying, "We need people down here that understand mental health because these people are traumatized. These people have PTSD. These people are hurting, and we don't have the resources to help them through this psychologically."
it was like a
And
war zone. It really
yeah,
was a war zone.
those are the kinds of things I kept in mind writing this book. Two of the couples in my book break up, Tommy and Cindy,
Hmm.
and James and Lori. James and Lori get a divorce that's very ugly. In fact, there's a scene where they're at the lawyer's office arguing about it. And then Tommy and Cindy, she leaves him because he won't stop drinking. And it's semi cordial because he helps her move to where she's going. They have a child together, and she says, "I don't want to see you here anymore because she's young and she'll forget about you if you quit coming around."
Ouch.
And he leaves and he wrecks his truck, and that's the end of it for him. Because he doesn't have anything to live for at that point. But just knowing that those kinds of feelings were going on with people was what drove a lot of this to wind up in the book, because it was just, but nobody talked about it except in whispers.
Hmm.
I would ask every once in a while, ask my husband, how are Casey and Jay doing, the salesman? And he's like, Jay's okay, but Casey, we don't know. We don't know.
So
We
many
don't know about
people with so many demons still. I mean,
you.
people who had anxiety, it's anxiety amped. People who were
Yeah.
um, uh, the human beings were resilient
Until they couldn't be
until
anymore.
they couldn't be anymore.
Well, it was interesting, Julie, that you saw the longer term effect on everyone, whereas I was pretty much left it up to a few months. But I think they're even different kinds of responses, but I think keeping up with the long term is also really important. And that shows really what this is still doing to some people
Mhm.
today. And I just want to bring up two other points if I could. One is Treme. If nobody's seen Treme, the show that's it's now being repeated on HBO or Prime Video, I think, one of those. A friend of mine, Lois Ellie, was one of the people that wrote a lot of those scripts for many of the shows, and but he's now moved out to LA. But he was a big family in New Orleans, and at that time, and he understood what I was talking about, and uh, he's the one that didn't come back, although loves the city.
Hmm.
Been his father, they've all been big powers in the Treme district for many. I suggest anybody read that because it happened. It takes place after Katrina,
Have you
and
been back since then?
but pardon that.
Have you been back
I
since the
have. I've been back.
rebuilding?
I've been back a few times on conferences or conventions, and I would drive a little around. It looked mostly different, but if you went into certain areas, not much different at all, like Ninth Ward and all that.
Just let it rock.
The other thing I was going to say is my book does the thing I've always believed in about circling back, uh, because uh, the what happens is this person who's the protagonist goes away and comes back. And I do think that's what people in New Orleans generally will do or would want to do. It's the same thing in the lower Rio Grande Valley
Hmm.
in Texas. It's the strangest thing. People grow up down there, they go off to Harvard or wherever they're going to do. And at some point, they want to go back and live in Brownsville or McAllen or wherever. And
We see that. I mean, Julie and I both seen that in our hometowns. I mean, people go away because they have to, because there's no way to make a living or wanderlust. I left because I'm leaving this town and I'm never coming back. Would never say never. Because
Yeah.
when I was 60 years old, I decided I should, it was the middle of COVID and I didn't want to, I was living in Mexico and I didn't want to stay in Mexico and I didn't want to go back to Seattle. And I had a super senior mother here and I was like, sigh, I guess I'll go back to Mississippi.
it's amazing how that
Yeah.
happens.
And
Yeah.
and and here I am, and I ask myself all the time, I'm like, why am I here? I really
Yeah,
think I'm here because I'm supposed to be capturing these histories and these stories that I write, that I
oh, I see.
capture.
Yeah.
And so, we're all storytellers in our own way. Um, I think that's part of the human condition too. That's there. Every culture and every society has a storyteller, and capturing and telling this story even 20 years later, I think is critical. I think it's a critical part of our history
Yeah.
and our oral tale, our oral telling of our experiences still come out in our writing. I was in Utah when this all happened. I was sitting there going, I was telling the people that I worked with, I was working for one of the early online universities. I was helping build out part of the way they tested their students. It was like, y'all don't understand what this is going to do. I mean, I was trying to tell them, they're like, well, they always get tornadoes and hurricanes, and it's just part. I'm like, no, you do not understand. Oh, New Orleans is built on submerged cotton bales. Like, this is not gonna be good. And and it's just like, I tell people, it's like when Florida, they just have four lanes to get people out and they just turn them around and make them all go that, and it's still bumper to bumper and you go 30 miles in 5 or 6 hours, and it's getting that many people out and that many impoverished people out was an insurmountable
Mhm.
task, period.
And we just somebody today was talking. They said, I think it was Margaret McMullen's article. She said it's amnesia. She said nobody ever tries to prepare for the next one, and I don't know why.
I
We
do.
could
You
we could
you
build more
can't wrap your
roads,
head around it.
and we could build more roads in and out of Mississippi to get people off of the coast and go up. We
Hmm.
need more than one highway going east and west to get people off of the coast. We need more than two. We've got 90 and we've got 10. And it's just
It doesn't
mind boggling
work.
how short sighted people are about this.
Uh-huh. People are, or even
Mhm.
our own government, which is
A topic for another day.
Don't get me started.
well, I wanted to look up something real quick on, what do you think was the final casualty count in New Orleans?
It was 1,500 in Louisiana, and it was a little less than 300 in Mississippi.
Right.
Do you think that's accurate?
Well, that's what they're saying is
Do you think that's accurate?
I don't know. They could have missed a few people. Um,
You can't count what's not there.
That's what's my thought.
but about only the population of New Orleans now is only 80% of what it was before Katrina. So it was around 500,000 then, and it's just around 400,000 now, according to the count. And that's leaned heavily towards white people coming back that are able to buy stuff and take over
It's going
black
to be
neighborhoods.
it's going to be gentrified.
And they tore down all the public housing.
Hmm.
So all that stuff was horrible stuff that happened.
I see a follow-up conversation coming on about Katrina.
After the next hurricane.
No, let's just pray there's not another one. But I think,
Yes, please.
you know,
Year
I
25, we can talk again.
yeah, when Rod's book comes out, the official book is out, and
Yeah, you and him have at it. Yeah.
then we can bring that back, and we can look into that some
I'm
more.
I'm good for it anytime.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming on this episode of the Tom Bigby Tales. And I know it's a kind of a somber episode, but I'm really grateful that both of y'all came on, and I'm really grateful that you wrote the books that you did. Um, I'm a public historian, um, a writer, and I narrative nonfiction and historic fiction that's well researched is very important. And I think capturing, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, you can't write about it. It's too near to where your time or your time frame." And I don't think it is. And I think that's very important to capture that essence and work on this when it impacts you most as a writer. And I'm so proud of both of you. And I'm very grateful that y'all came on my podcast, and I look forward to speaking with both of you again. And Julie, I'll see you tonight while we're writing. And
Okay.
and maybe we'll both write an essay tonight about our podcast today, experience
Mm-hmm,
today.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. It
Rod,
was great. Yeah.
Rod, can you tell us how we can find your book?
Well, you could buy on Amazon or most of those bookshop.
Barnes and
I think
Noble,
Barnes
any
and
place that
Noble. I think
that you
they're all
can find
posted up
books.
because it's wherever TCU has its books. It'll be
Okay,
there.
that's
And I
great.
know it's on there right now.
Do you want to remind us of the title of your book? And then will you
It,
send me the title and your little bio so I can put it in
okay.
my show notes?
But if anybody's listening want the title, it's Life in the Time of Hurricanes.
Okay,
And I'll send you that. I'll send you that.
perfect.
And
Julie,
mine is Hurricane Baby Stories.
Hurricane Baby Stories. Well, thank you both for being guests on my show. And I look forward to speaking with you both soon. Until
Well,
next time. Sir?
it could be something that tells people where to listen in if they want to.
Yes, I will send you the link.
Okay.
And you can listen in on Tom Bigby Tales. Any place where you listen to your podcast is also on YouTube.
Okay.
So
Okay. Well, I was just wanting to make sure I could put it on my social media or something. So,
absolutely, I will
okay.
happily I'll send you each the link once it's live. It'll go live later today.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much, y'all. I appreciate you both.
All right.